Hey everyone, David Aragona and Ashley Mailloux here, taking a look at one of the stakes races on Saturday at Belmont at the Big A, or Aqueduct, the Belmont at the Big A meet. Race 7 is the Grade 2 Woodward, going a mile and an eighth on the main track. And Ashley, this is a race that doesn't feature any of the leaders of the handicap division, but I think it creates a really intriguing race to handicap because you've got a lot of horses that look evenly matched, some that are looking to get back on track or get another graded stakes victory, and just a lot to dive into in this race from a handicapping standpoint.
Absolutely. From handicapping and betting, I think this is a race that, could offer some value. Zandon's 2-1 in the morning line, Charge it 7-2, but some of these other horses anywhere from 5 to 12-1 at their best, they are certainly capable of the top spot in the win honors. So I think it's a tremendous addition of the Woodward from that perspective.
Let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector for this race because it does feel like a race that features a little bit of speed. I mean, you see that fast pace flag showing up, and it feels like there are multiple horses that do want to be forward in here, particularly the number 5 Pipeline, who has done some of his best work over shorter distances, going this mile and an eighth. You'd have to imagine that his connections will be intent on going towards the front end. And also, though he's not shown on the lead, the number 10 Film Star feels like he has to try to get forward from that outside post position. He's done his best work when he's forwardly placed, and I think drawing all the way out in post 10, they're going to have to be aggressive with him.
Yeah, exactly. I think from post 10, your hand's a little forced, and he's been in some more compact fields, and maybe that's why he's been on the lead. But with the outside draw, he should be fairly close to it early on. And I agree with Pipeline. Obviously, Chad Brown has a couple of runners in here, but true, at least in his last 5 or 6 starts, he's been very close to it, if not on the lead.
And Chad Brown's other runner is the number 4 Zandon, who would appreciate a little pace to close into. He does have that Timeform US LP flag, indicating that he has the highest late pace rating in the field. Let's go through this field in post position order, beginning with the number 1 Charge It, and we'll take a look at his race 2 back, his most recent victory in the Suburban, another Grade 2 event, this one going a mile and a quarter at Belmont. And Ashley, Charge It's got to be a frustrating horse for both the connections and the backers because he's shown so much talent on occasion. I mean, we saw it when he ran that 111 Buyer to win the Dwyer going all the way back to the middle of 2022. But since then, we've seen glimpses of that kind of talent, but more often than not, he's disappointed, especially at the Grade 1 level. So we'll see if he can get back on track here and deliver another victory. But he's a horse that's kind of hard to trust.
He is hard to trust, and he's one that I think with the inside draw too, he should be pretty forward. I think that's probably the best sort of trip for him, and it gives him his best chances against this field, just looking at some of his best races in the last, say, 6 or 7 starts. But he's a head scratcher and is someone that has wagered on him. I can't figure him out a little bit. I think at a price at a 7-2 on morning line, those are odds come post time. I'm not sure I would take on him, just knowing that he is a little unreliable, but John Velasquez sticks with him here for Todd Pletcher. And he looked very good, I will say, in the Suburban, but it was a compact field, and I'm really not sure what he faced.
Yeah, he is a horse, like a lot of Tappets, that can be just one step slow coming out of the starting gate, maybe not the most focused at the start, so we'll see if that rail draw is perhaps not ideal for him. The number 2 is Law Professor, and actually, he's a horse that has had a lot of success at Aqueduct. He's run 3 of the best races of his career, going the 9 furlong distance at Aqueduct, including when he was second to Life is Good in this race last year, finishing second at 26-1 that day. Since then, he's sort of a horse that's had some ups and downs. He's run well at Aqueduct, has kind of followed it up with some more disappointing efforts. Now he's coming off a layoff for Rob Atras. Yeah,
we haven't seen him since the Grade 3 Pimlico Special, which I thought was an okay addition this year in terms of the field, won by Rattle and Roll, a next out winner. But I agree with you in the sense that he's a little hit or miss. I did think his performance in the Razorback, thought he raced pretty well looking at who finished in front of him, and an intriguing horse actually had success on turf as well. But I'm just wondering, off the layoff, he has been strong in the past, but off such a disappointing effort, I wonder if he'll need a start here, and maybe this is a starting point, but it's certainly not an easy one to kind of get back on the track.
Yeah, and following New York racing, Rob Atras has just not been winning at the same rate that he had been going back to last winter and the springtime, so we'll see if Law Professor can buck that trend. The number 3 is Algiers, who is a really intriguing wild card in this race, as he also comes off a layoff, having not raced since the Dubai World Cup, which we'll take a look at here. And he put in a pretty nice effort this day. That's him ranging up to vie for the lead as they come to the top of the stretch. And for a good furlong here, Ashley, it looks like he's going to win this race. And then things just kind of fall apart at the end. The closers come calling, and the Japanese horse Ushba Tesoro is able to run by him in the late stages. We know that he handles the dirt in Meydan, but that can be a different kind of dirt course than they face in the United States at times. So he's got some things to prove, but there is talent here.
There certainly is. I thought this was a really game performance, and we just know Japan in the last couple of years, they've really upped their game in terms of their program, and it's paid off. And the winner was very, very impressive in this year's edition of the Dubai World Cup. But it's an intriguing spot to find him. I think it's exciting for racing fans. William Buick's set to ride. You never know. It's a long layoff. It's a horse shipping over, as you've mentioned, the surface. It is dirt, but all dirts are very, very different in terms of their composition. But we'll see what he can do. I think he's certainly worth a price. I'm really curious, though, to see. He's 6-1 morning line. I'm curious to see what the betting public will do. I could see him taking some respect in here, or I can see some bettors being cautious.
Yeah, and one thing I'll note about his trips in Dubai is that if you watch those races where he was successful this past winter, they kept him out of the kickback every time. And I think that can be important for a horse that has more turf inclination to not have to deal with that kickback. Could be tougher to do from post 3 in this 10-horse field, so we'll see what kind of trip he gets. The number 4 is Zandon, and let's take a look at his most recent start when he was a distant second behind White Abario in the Whitney. And Ashley, I mean, we can watch any replay of Zandon, and it's basically more of the same. I mean, he's placing in very prestigious races like the Kentucky Derby, the Travers, the Met Mile, the Whitney, but he's just always finding a horse or two that's a little better than him. I mean, he's compiled quite a resume, but it's kind of weird to keep talking about him at the end of his 4-year-old season and say Zandon is still eligible for an N2X allowance race, yet here he is as the favorite in the Woodward.
Yeah, you make a good point there. I mean, he's got a little bit of second-itis this year, but as you've mentioned, White Abario beat him. He finally got back on track, and he was a horse that was very highly touted in South Florida as a 3-year-old, kind of looking at his season now as an older horse is doing well. Cody's Wish. I'm curious, though, I think the 1.125, he raced very well last time out, and in the past, it's been a good distance for him. Just curious in terms of the trip that he's going to get. I thought he was a little bit closer in the Whitney just because of the fractions. Naturally, I think in some of his other races, the tempo's been a little quick, and he's going to close from off of it. Worth a shot in here. But the question is, can he kind of snap that losing streak, just being kind of the bridesmaid and never the bride in this case? Got a lot of second place finishes.
Yeah, no doubt he's the class of the field. We'll see if he can get back to the winner's circle. Chad Brown's other runner is the number 5 Pipeline. Kind of an interesting spot for this horse. He showed so much talent going back to the middle of his 4-year-old season when he was 3rd in the Grade 1 Forgo at Saratoga behind the likes of Cody's Wish and Jackie's Warrior. But since then, things have just sort of fallen apart. He didn't run well in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, and his 2 races this season have been somewhat disappointing. I will say he was against a track bias when he came off the layoff, racing on a dead rail on August 3rd and then optional claimer, but still didn't run well as the heavy favorite that day. And then last time, I mean, it was the Grade 1 Forgo again, but didn't run nearly as well as the prior year. So he's got a lot to prove.
He does. The one thing, well, I'll make 2 comments. I think 1.125 miles has actually been a really good distance for him, so I'm excited to see him stretch back out. But I also just find the way that he's been managed by Chad Brown to be interesting. I feel like Chad typically, when a horse doesn't necessarily run the race that they expect or something like that, they will regroup and take that drop down in class. And to see him just go from the Forgo to the Woodward, they must think that this horse does have some talent underneath. He is going to have to face his stablemate, as we mentioned, directly to his inside. But to me, it's not maybe necessarily what I would expect from Chad Brown off those last couple of efforts. So I wonder if a big push to go to the Woodward is the 1.125 miles distance.
The number 6 is Costa Terra. Let's take a look at his most recent start at Saratoga. This was in an optional claiming race going the 1 3/16 distance in the mud. And do note the muddy conditions for this race because we're likely to have a wet track at Aqueduct on Saturday. There's a lot of rain predicted in the New York City area. So just something to note when you're handicapping this Woodward and other races at Aqueduct on Saturday. And Ashley, watching this replay again, I still can't believe that Costa Terra loses this race. He splits horses like he is going to win. And even coming onto the wire, looks like he's got this in the bag and just loses a pretty nasty head bob there. He is one of 3 in this race for Linda Rice. And what I will say is he's a closer, but Linda Rice's other horses in here, it feels like they do have some complementary running style. So maybe his late charge could work out.
And he's been really strong in his last 3 starts, though they were all at Saratoga. I just think with this year's edition of this field, there's better horses than him here, at least in recent form. But his numbers, they're not that far off. And I do like his performance last time out at a mile and a 3:16. So I like how he was able to get that trip. I agree, though. It looked like he should have won. He gets nosed out in the end. But she's got a stacked field here coming into this race, and we'll see what he can do. Looking at his races, he's been everywhere, but it's going to be his first start at Aqueduct.
The number 7 is Un Oho, who has his claim to fame being the upset winner at 75-1 of the Rebel Stakes going back to the 2022 Derby Trail. He's changed barns a couple times since then. He's now with trainer Linda Rice, and he's a horse that would be a little overmatched, I think, if he runs in this spot as a New York bred. It's primarily faced some weaker company recently. I will say he is also entered on Friday at Aqueduct as an MTO in the Ashley T. Cole for New York breds, and seems likely that race is going to come off the turf. So we'll see if we even see him in here, but it would be a tough spot.
It would be a tough spot. I mean, he was well beaten by Double Crown in the Polynesian at Pimlico. He's had some okay races here at Aqueduct, but that being in the Withers, but that's back in 2022. And I just think his recent forms and sort of the efforts that he's put in, my biggest knock would not only just be the caliber, but he's a horse that he's traveling well, and then he kind of stops a little bit. He stopped 2 starts back at a mile and an eighth on the front end, and then he just rated last time out at Pimlico, going slightly shorter at a mile and a 16th, and Double Crown just overpowered him in the stretch.
The number 8 is Tyson. Let's take a look at his most recent start in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. And this was a solid effort by this horse in his first attempt over dirt. All of his prior efforts had come over the synthetic courses, won at Gulfstream, and most of his recent racing up in Canada for trainer Josie Carroll. And he translated the form to dirt pretty well in this Jockey Club Gold Cup, beaten by the classy Proxy as well as the progressive Bright Future, who won this race. And he gets there in mid-stretch, just can't quite go with those top 2 at the very end. So based on this replay, you would say a turn back to the mile and an eighth distance could really work for Tyson. And we know that he's got the speed figures that says he can compete against this field.
Yeah, I was really impressed with his performance at Saratoga. I think going a mile and a quarter, his races, even a mile and eighth, would suggest he could probably get the distance. But I think that combined with a surface switch, it's drastically different. And it was a tough race to do that. But I think he raced all in all well. It was his first start without Lasix. So I was very pleasantly surprised. Javier Castellano is booked to ride him, and he's a 4-year-old who's really lightly raced. Obviously, he had a very long layoff between 22 and 2023, but I think there is some intrigue to him in this spot.
The number 9 is O'Connor, and at first glance, he looks like a horse, another one of these that might be a little overmatched from a form and speed figure standpoint. But a couple things about O'Connor. He's a horse that showed a lot of promise when he first came over to this country. He was an impressive winner of that optional claiming race, and I think they had some high hopes after that. They raced him just 2 starts later in the Pegasus World Cup. It just might have been too much too soon. They sort of regrouped. They came back with 2 starts in West Virginia recently and didn't get the best trip, I thought, in the West Virginia Governor's Cup 2 back. Was just sort of always out of position that day, trying to find a way through traffic. And then last time out in the Charlestown Classic, actually, a race that I know you have some perspective on, that was a race that was dominated on the front end by his stablemate, Skippy Longstocking, through some pretty slow to moderate fractions. And O'Connor was the only horse that made significant passing move at the end. And he went for all the way from last up to second. He ran a lot better than it looks from a pace standpoint in that race.
Absolutely. I think he ran a very, very strong race in the Charlestown Classic. And I was there that day, and I spoke to Tyler, who was aboard Skippy Longstocking, and talked to Safi. Safi was thrilled with both of those horses, being Skippy Longstocking and O'Connor. And in terms of trip, I wonder if he would have been a little closer. Would have he been able to close that gap, just because he was at the disadvantage there? And as you've alluded to, no one was making up ground really except for him. And I completely agree with his campaign. I mean, I remember being at Gulfstream when he made his North America, his debut in Florida. It was visually very impressive. And I think that kind of stamped where they were going to go from there. And his connections, wanted to go to the Pegasus World Cup, even though his effort before that, he wasn't able to beat his stablemate. But I think if you look at his last couple of efforts, they've started to finally put it together for him. And I agree with you too with that race at Mountaineer. The winner is actually trained by Josie Carroll, Duke of Love, who I think really prefers the dirt. And I think that race, it was a decent third overall. So now making that third start since April, I think he's a horse that has a lot of intrigue. And look who's booked to ride. I think people might notice that in the Woodward this year.
Number 10 is Film Star, and he closes out the field, and also the Linda Rice trio of entrants in this race. He's definitely the one of those Linda Rice trainees that has the most early speed, and he'll be looking to get forward from that outside post. Let's take a look at his most recent start at Aqueduct on September 17th. And like a lot of Linda Rice trainees, he's another one that's coming back on relatively short rest, just 13 days after this victory. But Ashley, not only was he beating weaker company this day, but also he got to control things on the front end through some pretty dawdling early fractions, and then sprint home. It's going to be a very different kind of trip in this Woodward.
It certainly is. And when we watch this race, I mean, I know Jose Ortiz is asking him to go forward, but he's not being really drastic with how he's asking him. And this horse is simply much the best. He's getting a bigger field. He has the outside draw in this big field. We talked about that earlier. I think he is going to have to be somewhat involved, but an interesting spot to tackle stakes competition for the first time, especially here being a graded stake. But I do think out of the Linda Rice trainees, I think from a pace perspective and maybe just the consistency, this is probably the best out of the trio, in my opinion.
Let's throw up our top picks for this Grade 2 Woodward. And Ashley, you're going to keep the hope up with Zanda that he can get back to the winner's circle in one of these races, because there's no doubt he's got the form to beat a field like this. He just has to put it all together.
Yeah, he has the form, but he hasn't been able to do it yet. And typically, if I'm being honest, I don't use horses like this on top because I'm scared of getting burned once again. But I just wonder in terms of his last couple, the competition that he's faced, the trips that he's got, I do think this is the spot for him. He is getting a field that I think is wide open. And I know we use a lot of the same horses, but when we talked about O'Connor, I mean, I like this horse, and I think you're taking a nice shot here with a horse that's might be a little bit of a price.
Yeah, I know we both have some interest in this horse. I put him on top just thinking he's going to be the right price in this race. I think he's got to be, even with Irad Ortiz riding, and he takes a lot of money, but just feels like a horse with the other star power in here will be the right kind of price. And just one more thing to note about him, if you've been following racing all around the country recently, Safi Joseph's horses have just been showing up and running big races wherever they go. He's got some really strong stats, especially in the past couple of months, and feels like he might be sending out a live one in this Woodward. So the number 9, O'Connor for me, and the number 4 is Zandon for Ashley in the Grade 2 Woodward on Saturday at the Belmont at the Big A meet at Aqueduct. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.